So thank you for the introduction. My name is Laura Weiner Kiser, and I work as a health and life coach. I'm also a nutrition specialist, a personal trainer, and a stress and a mindset coach. And I'm going to talk to you about how to redefine your relationship with food. But first, I want to start with a story. When I was 6 years old, I broke my arm. We happened to be at my aunt's house for a holiday, and I was playing outside with one of my cousins. While playing on the hammock, I noticed these bugs that were over my head and they were bugging me. So, like any bright 6-year-old, I thought, I know, I'll stand up and I'll shoo them away. And that's precisely what I did. Needless to say, I've not stood up on another hammock since. Now, on this particular holiday, my mom was driving back from Indianapolis, so I was just with my dad. I was a scrappy kid, always finding myself with bumps and bruises, so this didn't seem too different. I remember my dad carrying me inside, wiping away my tears, giving me an ice pack. But then he offered me some of my aunt's world famous brownies that I absolutely loved. But I said no. The next thing I remember is my dad calling my mom saying, "She said no to the brownies." To which my mom replied, "Take her to the hospital and I'll meet you there." Because I said no to food, that's how my parents knew something was wrong with me. If you read between the lines, you'll see the underlying message most of us were raised with. Food makes boo-boos feel better. There are hidden messages around food that have been following us our entire life, influencing how we relate to food. Today, I'm here to talk to you about how to redefine that relationship in order to break the obesity cycle. I'm going to cover the impact your relationship with food has on your life, how to nourish all of your mind and body hungers, and how to redefine your relationship to feel empowering. But first, let's start with a little game. I'm going to say some common food ideas, and if you've experienced this food idea or you're familiar with it, I ask that you raise your hand or comment in the chat. Ready? Comfort food. Everybody's hand should be up. We've all heard of this one. Clean plate club. You can't leave a table until your plate is clean. Dessert is a prize, aka no dessert until you've eaten your veggies. Thank you. These are only a few of the recognized hidden messages that create our relationship with food. Where do they come from? Mostly from society and our parents. Everywhere we look, from TV, billboards, magazines, and everywhere over social media, our relationship with food is being influenced. I don't know about you, but the messages from these slides seem pretty clear. Women are meant to be thin, and real men eat meat. But what if I said our relationship with food goes even deeper than that? Consider these examples. When new parents bring home a baby, they want to do anything and everything to make sure that the baby is okay. So if the baby starts to cry, normally they try to put it down for a nap, change its diaper, or give it food. But what if the baby's crying out for affection and we give it food? Or what if the baby's crying because it's angry and we give it food? You see where the relationship begins. Or what if someone you know is injured or ill? We typically try to show our support by bringing them food. Not just any type of food. They're not really looking for your standard veggie tray. They're looking for some comfort food. Personally, I've broken 9 bones, and I can attest to the fact that the sugary treats made the pain a little more durable. Or what about grief? When you've lost someone you love or someone you love has, we typically try to show our support by sending flowers or food. But again, we're not looking for that veggie tray. We're looking for some comfort food. The message is clear. Food comforts negative emotions. The problem with this understanding is it creates a mindset that influences our behavior to lean towards food whenever we feel bored, stressed, sad, angry, or any of our other uncomfortable emotions. But those are the emotions of daily life. We experience them every week. Let me demonstrate how this relationship sneaks into your life without necessarily knowing it. Not too long ago, I moved across country away from my family. I was experiencing my first and hopefully only global pandemic. I started my own business named Change by Challenge, and I bought my first house. So as you can imagine, stress and I were hanging out quite a bit. So I did what I do best. I found myself indulging in these delicious chocolate macadamia nut turtles from Costco. It wasn't but 2 weeks later that I looked in the mirror and I heard an old familiar voice. Ugh, you look so gross. You're so fat. Upon reflection, I had a revelation. New house, new business, new pandemic, new state. These are all new, unfamiliar stressors that I was experiencing in my life. But body shame, sadly, that was familiar. You see, at some point, my brain understood that if I'm stressed out, food is there to help me get out of that and put me into a different stressed out position that I know is survivable and more equipped to manage. We've been conditioned to understand that food makes these daily negative emotions better, but that's not the job of food. Food's job is to provide us with fuel, not comfort. It's when we focus on the comfort that we start to get ourselves in trouble. But you might be thinking, well, Laura, if we're not supposed to use food to cope, how are we supposed to deal with challenging emotions? It's a good question. Our body has all different types of needs. Another way of saying that is our body has all different types of hungers. A hunger for love, a hunger for connection, a hunger for rest, and more. By learning to understand your different needs or hungers and how to truly satisfy that need, you can stop self-sabotaging habits and break the food coping cycle. To illustrate that, I need to tell you about one of my clients. I'm going to call her Marissa. Marissa came to me wanting to get healthier. For her, that meant understanding how to eat and move her body in a way that didn't feel miserable. Within the first 6 weeks, she was making impressive progress. She wasn't ordering in as much. She was moving her body 5 times a week. She was feeling energized by food and really excited about how far she'd come already. But she had one challenge: dessert. She loved dessert. She was craving it every day. She wasn't eating it every day, but she was craving it. So I asked her how she feels on the day when she was eating dessert. And she shared that she felt comforted, cozy, and satisfied. Well, temporarily, she added. When I asked what those feelings were replaced with, she said feelings of guilt and loneliness. I thought, loneliness. Now, from former conversations with Marissa, I'm familiar that her and her sister often speak frequently in the evenings. So I asked her about the nights that she did speak with her sister and how that correlated to how she was feeling with dessert. Turns out those were the nights that she wasn't eating dessert or really craving it. So I asked her, is it possible that you've been using dessert to satisfy your need for connection? She thought about it, nearly jumped through the screen, screaming yes at me. Since then, Marissa has created a regular pattern of connecting with people throughout the day, and she's able to recognize that a sugar craving might just be a craving for connection that she diluted into thinking it's about sugar when really it's about connection. You see, Marissa was misunderstanding her body signal. She wasn't understanding how she was feeling before she craved dessert. Once she did, she realized she was feeling lonely and at some point had learned that food can temporarily comfort that need for connection. For so long, we've been convincing ourselves that all of our hunger signals are about food when they're not. Hopefully, you can see how our relationship with food is influenced and kind of works beneath our conscious awareness, causing self-destructive patterns. But now, let's talk solutions. It's really a 3-step process. First, we need to break our emotional conditioning. Second, we need to understand our physical hunger and fullness signals. And third, we need to change our thinking pattern. If we want to break our emotional conditioning, we first have to look at our emotional experience. We misinterpret our emotions. For so long, we've thought that emotions are good or bad, when really they're neither good nor bad. It's how we think about emotions that give them their power. Consider this. When you're feeling angry or sad, it's like we can't escape that emotion. But when we're feeling joy, it's like we can't hold on to it. So why the difference? Well, how often do you try to avoid feeling joy? Most people say never. Emotions are the language of the body. It's their way of communicating what we need. They act as our internal GPS. If we need connection, we might feel lonely. If we need a break, we might feel overwhelmed. We've been so conditioned to numb ourselves with food, but what we need to do is try to give ourselves space to understand the deeper body need that's calling from within. One of the main reasons we reach for food with negative emotion is because we don't like how they make us feel. And the chemical reaction of food, specifically sugar, is to release dopamine, which makes us feel a little bit better. We've been taught to use food to cope with challenging emotions. Food is no longer used for fuel, but to escape, numb, and distract. We're living in a society that's afraid of discomfort. We'll do pretty much anything and everything to avoid it. But these attempts to avoid it become our habitual pattern to deal with discomfort. And that pattern, our body gets addicted to and becomes our new state of homeostasis. Our tendency to avoid uncomfortable emotions and instead seek pleasure creates a destructive and addictive pattern. Each time we take a hit or a bite, we tilt the scales of our dopamine pain-pleasure balance toward the pleasure side. But what we're not recognizing is each time that scale tilts towards the pleasure side, we make it harder and harder to find balance. Meaning the more we soothe ourselves with food, the bigger and harder it is to face the very discomfort we're trying to escape. In a way, our food addiction is due to our inability to manage emotions. And by soothing ourselves with food, we make it harder and harder to break that addiction. Redefining how we relate to food means we need to do some internal work to break the emotional conditioning. And that means learning to become comfortable with the uncomfortable. But the good news is we misunderstand our comfort zone. We think of it as a concrete box, but in reality, our comfort zone is quite fluid. Think about when you've entered into a new job. You want to do well, and you might have previous experience, but you're not completely clear what the expectations and day-to-day functions of this job is, so it's a little uncomfortable. But after a couple months, you start to get the hang of it, and after a few years, you could pretty much do it in your sleep. Well, hold up. This was uncomfortable, and now it's comfortable. So what changed? Practice. The only difference between what we find comfortable and what we find uncomfortable is the amount of practice we've had. As I said earlier, we give our emotions their power because we try to avoid them, because they're uncomfortable. It's our avoidance that strengthens the discomfort. But if we can recognize what we need is actually experience and practice working through these emotions, they won't be as uncomfortable. Quick survey. Who here prefers sunny days to rainy days? Raise your hand for sunny days. And where are my rainy day people at? All right, let me ask you sunny day people a question. Do you think you'd be able to appreciate the beauty of the sun had you never experienced the rain? Most people say no. What we don't understand is that when we hide from our uncomfortable emotions, we also limit our positive emotions. So as you learn to sit with uncomfortable emotions, understand you're doing so not only to break the emotional addictive pattern with food, but also to expand your experience of joy, happiness, and peace. So that all sounds great, but what does it actually look like in real life to break that emotional conditioning? Let me tell you. I am a daddy's girl through and through. If you could not tell, that is my dad. Unfortunately, my dad does not have the best health. The first time he was in the hospital in my adult life, I remember stopping at the grocery store on my way to the hospital to get a thing of edible cookie dough to bring with me to eat next to his hospital bed. Sadly, not too long ago, he was back in the hospital. I actually thought I was going to lose my father. Sadness and fear consumed my days. So I leaned on my coping menu. I walked in a lot of beautiful parks. I meditated a lot and I journaled until my hand wanted to fall off. But it wasn't but 3 days later that I found myself in front of a Cold Stone, ready to emotionally numb out. I came home with my pint of ice cream, snuggled up on the couch, and I had about 3 bites before I got up and I threw it out. When I returned to the couch, my husband looked at me confused and asked me why I just threw out perfectly good ice cream. And I told him it wasn't working. Naturally, he was more confused. And I had to explain to him, I didn't actually want the ice cream. I was just looking for a break from the sadness that had been consuming me. I share this to illustrate that it's not a perfect practice and it takes time, but it's about slowly stretching yourself until food really does lose its appeal. As you notice from my story, I tried 3 new practices from my coping menu. I lasted 3 days longer than I had previously. And ultimately, I ended up throwing it out because it wasn't what I wanted. That was progress, and I'm very proud of it. We're talking about behavior change, and that's hard. And I want to make sure I'm setting you up for success. So as you practice sitting with uncomfortable emotions, it would be wise to create a menu of things that you can do instead of eating to help soothe your nervous system. For example, mine includes journaling, puppy cuddles, TED Talks, podcast, anything with comedy, stand-up comedians, bloopers, things of that nature, nature walks, solo dance parties, or meditation. Now let's talk about the second piece of the puzzle. Becoming more attuned with your physical hunger and fullness signals. Our body likes to automate whatever it can. And when we've been eating in a similar capacity for years and years, our body regulates our hormones to release, causing us to think we're hungry, when really we might not be. There's a difference between physical hunger and mental hunger. Let me demonstrate. This might get weird for a second, but we all do it, so bear with me. How do you know when you need to poop? Just think about it. Maybe your tummy starts to hurt a little bit. Maybe you feel a bit of pressure, but I'm guessing you don't add your food plus your water divided by your sleep and stress and tell your boss you need a 15-minute break at 2:30. When you know you got to go, you know. We trust our body to let us know when to eliminate ourselves, but we don't trust our body to let us know when we need to fuel ourselves. Well, let me ask you this. Has anyone here experienced the belly growl? That's our body's way of communicating what we need. It's similar with fullness. We all know what it feels like when we've eaten so much and we feel bloated or like we need to unbutton our pants. I don't know about you, but I really don't like that feeling. When it comes to fullness, we need to become more familiar with what it feels like to be satisfied. That's where you've enjoyed your meal, but there's still some space in your gut. You could go for a walk or you still feel light, but truly satisfied. Which is why one of the things I have all of my clients do is write down, that part's important, write down their signals, the physical signals they experience for light hunger, hunger, hanger, satisfied, full, and stuffed. Then learn to eat at true hunger and stop at satisfied. Let me explain why that's important to understand these levels. As I mentioned, I have my own business, Change by Challenge. And if you know anything about being an entrepreneur, you work a lot. So there was one night a couple of years ago that I'd been working about 16 hours and I had about 30 minutes left that I wanted to get done. But I noticed my mind kept wandering to sweets. Now, I know myself well enough that I don't really keep that stuff in the house. But my husband, he likes his sweets. So I was thinking about what he might have in the house that I would like. But then I slowed down just long enough to check in with my gut. And I realized I was experiencing my fullness signals, which makes sense because I'd eaten an hour prior. So I closed my eyes, I took a deep breath, and I asked myself, what was I actually feeling? And the answer was exhausted. So I went to YouTube, I put on some bloopers of Parks and Rec, I laughed my butt off for about 15 minutes, and I was so energized, I worked for another 90 minutes. Because we tend to be moving so fast, the first thing we notice is a craving. But having a true understanding of what your physical signals are can help you learn to differentiate between that mental hunger and the physical hunger that's truly calling out for you. Now, I didn't just say I wanted to help you redefine your relationship with food. I said I wanted it to be empowering as well. That means teaching you to not make it a chore, which brings me to the last piece of the puzzle, how we think. We are run by our hormones. When we're stressed, more cortisol is released. When we're tired, more melatonin is released. But all these hormones start with a thought. Because most of us have followed some type of restrictive diet, most of us have a negative taste in our mouth at the thought of a diet, myself included. How we think about our eating patterns influence how we experience our eating patterns. If you have thoughts like, I can't eat this, I shouldn't have that, or I have to do this, ugh, it just feels negative. It feels like a chore to be healthy. And I don't know about you, but I've never actually enjoyed chores. Not even as an adult. I still don't enjoy chores. Not only is that thinking unpleasant, but it also leads to the inevitable binge. So let me be clear. I'm not talking about a diet at all. I'm talking about a complete revamp of your relationship with food. That means sometimes you indulge and sometimes you don't. There's nobody telling you what you should or shouldn't have, what you have to eat, or what you can or can't do. Instead, I encourage my clients to befriend foods that are friendly to them. If you eat cheese and cheese hurts your tummy, maybe you and cheese don't hang out every single day. Maybe you guys are more of weekend friends. It's not about what you can or can't have. It's about understanding how the food feels in your body. Think of it this way. If you had a big presentation tomorrow, you likely wouldn't go out boozing tonight and risk the hangover. Well, similarly, if you know that cheese hurts your tummy, maybe you don't have nachos before the very same presentation. It's not about what you can or can't have. It's about choosing when you're okay to feel a little icky and understanding what foods energize you. Because at the end of the day, our brain likes to feel good. So if we think about it through that lens, it makes it a lot easier to make choices aligned with our weight loss journey. When you shift your thinking out of restriction and into friends you hang out with based on how you want to feel, it's a choice, not a chore. To summarize, we have hidden food messages influencing us our entire lives. We were never taught how to translate our brain-body communication pathway. Instead, we've been conditioned to think of food as coping tools for unpleasant emotions. If you want to redefine your relationship with food and break your food addiction, you need to learn to sit with the uncomfortable emotions and practice allowing them to flow through you. Try expanding your coping menu to include activities that feel rewarding and soothing outside of food. Start to understand what your true hunger and fullness signals are so that you can help differentiate between all of your body hungers and needs. Get clear on what true hunger feels like and what satisfied feels like so you can feel your best. And finally, how you think matters, aka no more chores. Be specific with how you speak to yourself around food. Choose which foods you want to be friends with and when. Learn what foods make you feel your best and which friends you need to hang out with a little less. And I'll end with this. All relationships, be that with food or people or work or time, they have seasons. In order to navigate those seasons, we have to face harsh, sometimes uncomfortable realities about our relationships. When it comes to our relationship with food, If we can choose to change the narrative around the purpose of food and build a stronger internal resilience and foundation, we regain power to fuel ourselves instead of numbing ourselves. But with that being said, I just wanted to say thank you for tuning in and listening, and I appreciate each and every one of you for being here with me today. Are there any questions?